Thanks for joining us. I'm here today with our friend Therese Taylor-Stinson. Therese just published a new book with Broadleaf Books titled Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman, Public Mystic and Freedom Fighter. Therese is a writer, spiritual director, ordained deacon, and ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church USA. A graduate of the Shalem Institute and a member of Shalem Society for Contemplative Leadership, she's also the founding managing member of the Spiritual Directors of Color Network. Therese is the editor of the award-winning collection, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. She lives her life as a contemplative and enjoys the natural world and the people and projects that are drawn to her as gifts. She and her husband live in Silver Spring, Maryland. And I should also mention that Therese contributed to Volume 2 of our How to Heal Our Divides book, which we greatly appreciated. You can learn more about the new book at broadleafbooks.com. So, Therese, welcome back. It's always so good to spend time with you, and many congratulations on the new book.
Thank you, Brian. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm really glad, to hear that it's getting such good recognition already, even though it's new out of the gates. But anyway, to start off, what else would you like people to know about you?
Know about me. That I have two grandchildren. Did you say that? I have two grandchildren. One just turned 10 last month in March, and the other one turns 13 in May.
Well, those are important things.
My, how time flies. Yes, so they're living in Georgia now. And let's see, what else? Just really busy with the Spiritual Directors of Color Network. Something that we've talked about a lot is things are beginning to unfold now. So we're making partnerships with other programs and different people. I was telling you, I went on a civil rights pilgrimage with the North Carolina Institute for Spiritual Direction and Formation for a week in Alabama. So just a lot of things. And actually, because we were on, which was a totally separate thing, but because we were on the pilgrimage when the book launched on Valentine's Day, we actually had like a little book party that evening, and everybody in the pilgrimage bought a book. So
wow, there you go.
I was selling books right away.
That worked out well. So before we talk about the book, maybe we could spend a little bit of time about the Wild Goose Festival. You were telling me kind of the history of your involvement in that, which goes back quite a few years.
Yes, since 2014, I started out with Shalane. They were invited to come set up a tent to do spiritual direction. And, this is really funny because I went there as a spiritual director. I know what it's like to sit across from other people, but it was a festival. So, when you hear festival, you think of people being lighthearted and happy and so celebratory. And here I was sitting across from people who really had very deep issues. And it was surprising to me. I also felt grateful to be there, and sit with these people. But it was surprising to me that at a festival, people were carrying such heavy things in their heart. And so anyway, but the sessions that I had went very well. And so I decided that I wanted to come back. So I think I was telling you the next year they had turned it over to Linda Sarepka, who's with the Charlotte Spirituality Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so she's been doing it, getting her own tent and running that spiritual direction from her tent since then. And every year I go there, and sometimes now I bring other people from the Spiritual Directors of Color Network so that we have a more diverse group of people there to offer spiritual direction. And it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I know it's gone.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes. And I was just going to say also, I think the next year I started, it was during one of those intense times. I don't think it was George Floyd. I think it was someone prior to that. But one of those intense times where many of the workshops were dealing with, police brutality and different things like that. And people were really tense. And so I decided that I wanted to offer a centering prayer at the Goose to just give people a chance to settle in and have a chance to be with other people and settle themselves, center themselves. And so we've done that, and that's now something that they expect every year too. So I'll be doing it again this year at the Goose, which is in July. Can't remember the dates right off the top of my head, but if you haven't been to the come and visit us. It's really a wonderful event.
Yeah, I want to say something like July 14th through 17th. I'm not exactly sure.
Yes, something like that.
North Carolina, and you go to Wild Goose Festival website, you can find out all the details. But yeah, we'll both be there again this year, which I know we're looking forward to. So let's get to the book. As I mentioned, the title is Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman, Public Mystic and Freedom Fighter. So what motivated you? What led to that book coming to existence?
So I always start out by saying that I'm a Black woman. So I've known of Harriet Tubman all my life. I've always heard of Harriet Tubman. But through the years, I've come to know her more intimately. And so one of the ways that happened was that I started going to the Congressional Black Caucus, and they had the Community Healing Network offering sessions there about emotional emancipation, and also giving more information about the oppression of people of color, and how this is not just happening in the U.S., but the first Congressional Black Caucus event I went to for that, they had people from all over Europe, from different countries in Europe, as well as people from the United States, talking about the oppression of Black people in those various places. And so the Community Healing Network, along with the Association of Black Psychologists, have something called emotional emancipation circles. And they started training people to become facilitators. So over maybe like a 4-year period of going each year to those Black Congressional Caucus events, I eventually became trained as an EEC facilitator. And the Community Healing Network, along with Maya Angelou, is another person they hold Harriet Tubman up as someone that the more I learned about her, and the more I came to know what emotional emancipation was, I realized that Harriet Tubman had to have herself an internalized sense of freedom, the ability, as Howard Thurman would say, she had found the genuine in herself, and she was able to act from there, even with all of, the things the obstacles, the disabilities, her brain injury, all of these things that would have made anybody else sit down and not do anything. She used those things in her favor. And so Shalane asked me, Margaret Benefield, who is now the executive director for Shalane, when she first became the executive director, had a talk and wondered if I would help her to lead some kind of an excursion that might be interesting to people of color, so that they weren't just appealing to one group of people. And so I told her, what about a pilgrimage to the Eastern Shore and visit about Harriet Tubman? So she was interested in that idea. So we formed a group and ended up getting a van for ourselves and taking about, I think it was about 12 to 15 of us that got in this van. Two people traveled from wherever their location was to the event. And one of the people that I'd known from many years ago but hadn't been in contact with, Tony Cohen, who is a historian and has walked the entire Underground Railroad, and he now has a place in Germantown, Maryland, where he's hosting the Harriet Tubman statue that's going around the country with her holding the hand of a child, bringing them along. He had his opening on Sunday at Button Farm is the name of where he lives, and it's in the Seneca State Park in Maryland, in Western Maryland. But it is also land that used to be where enslaved people were. So there's a lot of history there. But anyway, back to my story. Tony, I asked Tony if he would be our guide when we went on this pilgrimage because he knew all of the places to go. So we went to the Eastern Shore. We stayed at the Holiday Inn, and we spent that Saturday on a tour all around the area. We went to the new museum they have there in Cambridge. Well, outside of Cambridge, but they also have a small museum in Cambridge. And we went down to the Long Wharf. We went to the courthouse where the enslaved stood. And then at one point we go to the Choptank River. And the Choptank River was one of the places where Harriet took many of the people across the river to get to Philadelphia. And Tony gave us each bags, and we had sweet gums. They're trees that have these sweet gums hanging from them that are kind of sticky. And during the fall, when most of her travels would begin, they would be falling from the trees on the ground. The enslaved people were not allowed to wear shoes. And so they would have to run over those sweet gum, which were abundant, not just the little bags that Tony had given us. But the bags that he had given us, he told us to take them out the bags and put them in our hands and squeeze them so we could see how they, poke you. And we talked about, joy and pain and what it felt like to us. And then we walked down to the river. And he gave us all a cup. And we walked down to the river and we named our personal ancestors, like I was naming my grandmother, who I love. She's, and who I write about in the book, by the way, a dream I had about my grandmother. And as we're standing down there at the river, we are calling out the names of our ancestors and pouring the libation into the water. And if you don't mind, I can read to you because that's how I started the book. When Lil Copen and I talked about what I was going to write, this is where I started the book.
Good. That'd be great.
Okay, it's not that long. As I stood on the bank of the Choptank River in Dorchester County, Maryland, one early spring afternoon, in a single line across the sand with other pilgrims in this Tubman journey, I was in awe of the flickers of light reflecting off the water from the noonday sun, holding sweet gum pods in our bare hands, reflecting on the joy and pain the enslaved endured. We imagined them running barefoot with the abundance of sweet gum under their feet. Through the woods to the river, Harriet was leading them to freedom. We walked to the bank of the river and poured libation as we named our personal ancestors, Mama Harriet among them. Then we fell silent. In the silence, the wind picked up strength, blowing a soft but forceful presence in our direction. I couldn't help but believe that Harriet and others we named were before us, welcoming our presence. Slowly, the forceful breeze ceased. I turned with wide eyes to our guide, that was Tony, who stood next to me, and he nodded confirmation. No words, but he knew and I knew we had been visited by our ancestors. That this was a mystical experience I will never forget. Now even closer to me are Mama Harriet and her treks to freedom. So I often would spend time, if we were driving anywhere around where I live or even on the highways sometimes, I would spend time, my husband usually does the driving, and I would spend time looking in the woods, just imagining what it might be like running through the woods. And, we may not even be in a place where they run, but the woods, the swampy areas and everything. And I was just imagining, how could you possibly be able to do something like that? And the only answer that I have in terms of Harriet is that she had such a deep confidence in herself and who she was, and also a deep faith in God, that she was not really very fearful, but she felt like this was her call and for her to do. And so she did it well. As far as I know, she's the only person that did this who didn't lose anybody along the way.
So how did all of that turn into a book?
So, Lil came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting it, but I got a call from her. Broadleaf Books is a new imprint, and she said she was looking for writers, and would I like to write a book for them? so, I said, okay. I said, what would you like me to write? Whatever you want to write, you tell us what you want to write.
Wow, that's amazing.
And yeah. And so I said, okay, well, let me think about it. And, what I'm telling you prior to that is that I was becoming more interested and closer to Harriet from my own experiences, and her name just coming up. And as I began to hear more and understand more about her, and thinking about my own emotional emancipation and how I can be of service to other people of color with their emotional emancipation. Still is, even though the book is written now, still very close to me in terms of, encouraging me forward in whatever it is I am called to do. And so eventually I called her and said, I think I would like to write a book about Harriet Tubman. And I actually told her that story about, being at the river. I wish I could bring up a picture. I'm not sure where it is. It would take too much time. But I did take a picture of us standing at the Choptank River with the flickers of light coming off the water. And so I called her back. I think we made an appointment or something to talk in a certain amount of time. And I said, I think I'd like to write a book about Harriet. And so she said, okay. And so what would I write? So the first thing I do is search around, and I mostly used Amazon, since Amazon is the bookseller these days. But I looked in Amazon, and they had about 35 histories of Harriet Tubman. So I said, I don't really need to write a history about Harriet Tubman. So I was looking to write about her spirituality, because that's the thing that drew me to her more closely. And I only found one book. It was a very small book. My book isn't all that big either, but it was a small book that didn't just address Harriet, but also Sojourner Truth in terms of their spirituality. And so I decided that I was going to write my book about, the mystical experience that happened at the Choptank River, her spirituality. And so I did tell her story. So when we were at the Underground Railroad Museum down in Cambridge, they had a bookstore, and one of the books that I think recently had come out that they had in there was Kate Larson's biography. I think that may be the most recent biography. And they were saying that hers was the most accurate. Before that, I think Sarah Bradford's biography was the one that everyone went to. But they said that there were flaws, things that weren't accurate in it. That also turned out, because last year was Harriet Tubman's 200th birthday anniversary, there were also some errors in Kate Larson's, and they were updating that too. So everybody was trying to update the history on Harriet. So I just took the things and this was actually, quite a struggle. I had to go back and corroborate some of the things that I was pulling out, because there was conflict between the historians about what was, historically accurate and not. And so that's how I came up with this book, to write about her in terms of her spirituality and her internal sense of freedom, even before she begins the treks to her making herself free, and then her family free, and then, being part of the Union Army and taking care of some of the soldiers and also helping them to free some of the enslaved in areas where they were.
What would you say was like one of the most surprising things that you learned through all of that research?
I think the most, well, first of all, what did I learn from all of that research? That Harriet, as Therese was writing the book, Harriet was also learning as she went, So at first she was taking people to Philadelphia, and then they passed a law where even if you got out of your enslaved area, if the slave catchers could catch you, you were taken back. They were not free, really. And so Harriet had to move further north and then all the way to Canada to get them free. Along the way, she began to learn other things. So she learned what I named her as a womanist, because she met, many of the feminists, the abolitionists and the feminists who were around at the time, and they began to help her understand the disparaging ways between males and females. But also she was still focused on her people, and she knew that male or female, all of them were oppressed in ways that they were not experiencing oppression, even in the North. And then she had to move them all the way to Canada. And so it's surprising to me, because this wasn't, I think sometimes she may have had waterway, like a boat or something, but I think for the most part they walked, and they had to stop at times and rest. And they walked at night where they would be less seen and less captured. And they rested during the day, sometimes maybe at an underground railroad stop, maybe sometimes in the woods in a tree hollow or something like that. That's amazing to me. And then she manages not only to take those people to freedom, eventually she opens up a place for people to stay in upstate New York. She had like a aging facility for people herself, and then, some other people. And she lived into her 90s. So that all of that is like amazing to me, based on her life story and the things that she'd been through.
Yeah, really. So what would you say are some of the things that kind of today's audience could learn from Harriet's example?
I think that, this is a discussion I'm having in a lot of different contexts. Even in your book, I was sort of having this discussion about empathy. But what I find is that I think, I just said this the other day, I think that we're all, to the most part, unless we're one of the 1%, excuse me, unless you're one of the 1%, we're all sort of oppressed in a way. We have a certain way of being imposed upon us. And if we're not operating out of that code that people don't really talk about, it's just there, and you're supposed to behave or do certain things in order to be approved, then you're oppressed. And so I think we're all, even if we're not aware of it, we're all oppressed in some kind of way. And the way, for me now, I think that the way for us to most be free is to come to know ourselves and to have that internalized freedom, which will actually also help us to more live into what we're called to do. Because the other thing this book is about is public mysticism, which is a public mystic is a phrase coined by Barbara Holmes. And so in the book, I named public mystics, Harriet being number one public mystic. And a public mystic in African indigenous beliefs. As a matter of fact, I don't even just put it on African indigenous beliefs, but I think in most indigenous belief systems, community is at the forefront. And so a public mystic is somebody who's not, gazing into the sky and worshiping something they can't see or hear, but they're using the gifts given to them, innate gifts. We all have them given to them to help their communities. And so I'm actually in the book sharing about what indigenous belief systems are like, and that they're not to be shunned or thought of as pagan, but thought of as ways of our helping our communities. And then also naming some of the people in our history, my history, and people of color who are those mystics, those public mystics: Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Tracy Blackman, William Barber, different people who are giving up their life and their service from their innate gifts to help others and to draw people into community. And so that's one of the things I wanted to lift up in the book, is to help everyone who reads the book to maybe consider their own internalized freedom. And so at the end of each chapter is something called Harriet's Apothecary. So an apothecary is, if you don't know, apothecary is like back in the day, like a little drugstore where there are these different herbs and ointments and things that people have put together. And Harriet would have known a lot about, because that's part of indigenous practice as well, knowing the lay of the land and the herbs and things that help you to heal or to feel better. So they put these things together. And so this was like, an old-fashioned pharmacy or something. So in my book, I'm not putting herbs and things together, but I'm taking Harriet's story and putting it with John Lewis and different people that have influenced me with music or poems or written different things, Alice Walker. And I can't remember everybody right off the top of my head. And giving people an exercise through maybe like centering prayer, or maybe just getting up and doing a dance or something that helps you to become more in touch. One of the exercises is about taking a walk in your neighborhood and paying attention to the networks that may be in your neighborhood, and how are you connected to those networks. So those are at the end of each chapter in Harriet's Apothecary, for people to exercise for themselves and be more in touch with their own internalized freedom.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. But I'd also like you to talk about, what you told me before we started the recording too. Another form of network now that we have, is through mediums like this. And so you got to participate in a book discussion about your book that was basically headquartered in New York City, and you live in the DC area, as I mentioned. So yeah, it's a different form of network that we have now, right?
Yeah, I think that there were some blessings in the pandemic. Because, I was using Zoom before the pandemic, but Zoom has become a lot more popular, and other ways of being visual with other people than it was in the past. And you know what, this is sort of an aside, but I've been thinking about this for a long time. When I was growing up, there was a cartoon show called The Jetsons. And I'm seeing a lot of what was happening on the Jetsons happening with you and me. Yes. But it was wonderful. I didn't know they were doing this. I can't remember what I was reading, but I happened across something. I may have been on Facebook, or something, but I happened across something that said Middle Church, and I knew that was Jackie's church. Middle Church is having a book study over Lent on my book. And so I was like, oh, I want to be a part of that. I didn't want to be a part of that to tell them what they should think of my book. I wanted to see what people naturally thought of my book, as they discussed it. And so I signed up for it. And when the leader, Amanda, when she saw my name, she reached out and asked would I like to lead. I could lead, or I could, make an introduction of the book the first day or something like that. And so I said, no, I really would just like, how many times do you really get an opportunity to hear people talk about your book and how it's affecting them? So I mostly just want to listen, but I did warn her I might feel like I have to say something sometimes. And I did occasionally, but I was very disciplined. And it was wonderful. They loved the book. Their ideas were right in line with what I thought, when I was writing the book and everything. And so it was a 4-week on Wednesday, a study that we did, and had a beautiful ending, and everybody was very happy with the book. And I was telling you earlier also that the publicist that Broadleaf asked me to write an essay about the writing process on the book. And so among other places, I posted it on LinkedIn and Facebook and different things like that. But Amanda made, there's something called Padlet or something like that. And she made it for us. If we had a poem we wanted to write or something, we could put it on Padlet for everybody. And so I put my essay there on the writing process for Harriet Tubman.
Yeah, please email me that link, and I'll share that with
Yes.
you too. So
and actually, if I can say one more thing.
Sure.
This past Saturday, Tony Cohen, historian, walker of the Underground Railroad, who lives in Germantown, Maryland, received this past Saturday the statue that's going around the country by an artist who made a statue of Harriet with one hand stretching back, and she's bringing, what they say in one of the stories, she's bringing one of her nieces, I think it is, to freedom. And so it's a beautiful statue. Tony is in Germantown, Maryland, at the Button Farm, which is property that's on the Seneca Creek Park that's in Western Maryland. And beautiful statue and lots of events going on. If you Google Tony Cohen, Cohen, or Button Farm, it may come up for you, because I can't tell you the address right off the top of my head. But it would, if you're in the area or you feel like driving to the area to that, it's really a wonderful experience. I had the opportunity to be there. I sold books at the event, and also said a prayer and read a quote from Harriet Tubman as we welcomed the statue to his property.
Very cool. Very cool. So this has been great. I mean, is there anything else about the book that you'd like people to know?
Please read it. I can't express enough how I really think that there are changes that need to be happening. And every time we think we're headed in a good direction, it seems like things get darker. And so I can't tell you how much I really honestly believe, as a spiritual director, that our freedom comes from within. And if we can learn to really allow ourselves to be who we really are, as Thurman would say, to find the genuine in yourself, I really believe it can make all the difference in your personal world and in our world as a whole.
Amen. Amen. Totally agree. So looking forward, I mean, I know you're in the middle of a book launch right now, but I mean, are there any future books or other projects that you're able to talk about at this point?
So my editor, signed me up for 2 books, actually. I haven't heard from her about the second book yet or what it might be. I've been thinking about what might be. I've given her a couple of examples. Actually, through the years, I've written a number of sermons. I've actually given sermons in my presbytery and things like that. And so I happened to be on retreat, and they were having like a Bible study in the morning. It's supposed to be a silent retreat, but they had another group there, and they were having a Bible study, and they asked me to be there. And so we were reading a passage and then giving our own ideas about what that passage meant. And so it just so happens I had a conversation with Lil while I was supposed to be on this silent retreat. And I said, you know what? I think I want to write a book, Sermons of a Layperson. And so I don't know. She seemed to think maybe that was a good idea or not. I don't know if it'll be that or something else, but whatever it is, hopefully it will be as wonderful as it was writing Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure it will be. We'll look forward to that. So, Therese, thanks so much for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to spend time with you. I really appreciate all of your work. I mean, just such a role model for everyone. One of the blurbs about your book calls you a trailblazer. And, I feel that way too. Whether you recognize it or not, I think you are.
I have people saying things like that to me sometimes,
Yeah,
but I like being a trailblazer, but I really feel like it's part of me using my own internalized freedom.
Sure, absolutely. You can see it. I mean, it shows. So
well, thank you, Brian, for having me. I enjoy talking to you.
Oh, absolutely. It's always fun.
At the Wild.
Yeah. We'll get together in July.
Yeah.
So again, the title of the book is Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman, Public Mystic and Freedom Fighter. Please go to broadleafbooks.com and check it out. Therese, again, congratulations. I'm really thrilled about this book.
Thank you.